Hello, Peaceful Warriors. This is your host, Anil, and welcome to my show, Peaceful Growth, where I interview successful entrepreneurs and experts who have achieved remarkable growth in their business or profession. We all want to grow in our life, right? But not at the cost of our peace and happiness. So we also talk about some of the strategies, tips, and techniques on how to manage this growth by also having a successful and purposeful life. You can also sign up for my weekly newsletter, Learn Plus Grow, at anilg.substack.com, where I share 3 tips to help you learn, grow, and inspire each week. Now to today's episode. Hey everyone, my today's guest is Lance Robinson. Lance has 15 years of experience growing and leading distributed organizations. He's helping hybrid and remote companies maximizing profits by building engaging and productive workplace experiences. In today's episode, we deep dive into 6 key skills for remote work managers and tips for entrepreneurs to be successful in remote work culture and a lot more. Let's get started. We start with the first question, Lance, that what's your story? And I had a chance to learn a little bit about you, and you talked about, you have been speaking and writing about remote work culture, tips and advices for the managers in the remote work setup. So yeah, let's start there.
Sure. Okay. I'll try to make it brief, but I'll go back about 15 years. So, putting myself through college, I had an opportunity to join a family business, my wife's side of the family, which was in reforestation, agriculture, planting the trees that are grown and harvested and replanted for lumber and paper products. And I didn't know much of anything about anything, right? I was getting my degree in history online, working myself through that. And I came in and needed to figure out like the operational side of running a business. And we were going to have 90 seasonal employees at that year. And long story short, over the next 10 years, I grew running and operating that business. We were at 400 people when I left. All over the southeastern United States, planting millions of trees every year. So I learned an awful lot about distributed operations and how work gets done when people aren't in the same location. And I didn't realize the value of that until I had made a switch over into the technology arena. At the time that I did that, I desperately needed some balance in my life. If anybody is listening has ever been involved in agriculture, you know that there's a saying that you make hay when the sun shines. And when it comes to planting trees, you plant trees when it's cold. So, right. Fall, winter, spring was busy season for us. Mm-hmm. And it was great. I didn't have kids, but then when the kids came and they started to grow, I had to have some breathing room for me and my family. So making a transition from a very analog focused, old traditional, paper checks, paper invoices, way of working over into XWP, a WordPress agency. And
so XWP was your first company?
My first move into tech, was with XWP. Okay. And so a connection there said, hey, we need help with operations. And I said, well, I'm good at that, right? So I was looking for flexibility in my own life, right? We had an organization that had to work very flexibly because the work was all over the place, but I didn't have any flexibility in my own life. I was tied to the office, making sure everyone else's work was happening. And so I moved into this completely remote distributed organization, and it was such a breath of fresh air. And a few years into moving into technology, I began to see how important it was what I had learned before coming in, just out of college, joining a family business. I just didn't know what I didn't know. And so we started in on this remote working journey, and I began to see the value of, output versus hours, productivity, measuring that instead of just measuring an input. And, proactive over communication, because you have to anticipate every scenario, because people are all over the place and you don't know what's going to be happening for them. So you have to think ahead and you communicate that out there and double check and make sure you have a plan and make sure you're following up. And all these principles that I gathered and learned in forestry strangely translated really, really well into the remote technology space. So I was able to, find a good footing there. I spent collectively in a couple of different stints, 5 years with XWP, have done a number of consulting contracts, helping other organizations operationally set up for remote. During the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a big transition time for a lot of companies. Was able to help quite a few organizations there figure out, hey, how are we going to do this? We want to do it, and I'm an advocate for it. So I was happy to help and excited to be involved in that. Learned a lot there. Got to experience a lot of really interesting problems and help solve those. And so now kind of bringing together my experience with the people operations stuff with XWP, which I did, grew their talent acquisition program and the recruiting program there, along with the consulting work that I've been doing. And I'm bringing this together in my own practice now, and having a chance to work with companies all over the world, making the remote workplace a good experience. It shouldn't be such a terrible experience. And I want to help that be really positive for people.
Yeah. No, that's a really interesting problem to solve, Lance, and especially a lot of companies and the managers around the world, they're actually struggling with that. We have in Multidots, we have 120 employees at this moment. And when originally when we started Multidots, like we had a one office, and it was like very important for everyone to kind of connect, have lunch together. We would do like fun things and all. And then when we transitioned to remote work, we found that people were missing that connections, and it was challenging, like not just from the perspective of the workflow, like, that not seeing the person and like you need to learn new tools, new ways to communicate, but also more from the psychology perspective about just they were missing that connection. And I have heard that a lot from my team, plus other friends who are also entrepreneurs. Some of them actually decided to go back to the office because it wasn't sustainable for them, or it didn't work, the remote work. So yeah, I think it's a big challenge, and a lot of entrepreneurs as well as the employees, they both are struggling with this. And so yeah, I would like to ask you, what are the tips for the entrepreneurs or businesses and managers that they can take an advantage of?
Yeah, that's such a good observation, and I'm really glad to hear that you saw that, or aware of that, and are like purposefully thinking about how do we solve for this need for connection. Harvard Business Review published a study recently that was showing that connection alone, as part of your bigger qualities of culture, right? But connection being a strong one of those, right? There's other things like trust, belonging, collaboration, transparency, communication, but connection being one of those. They're finding that the business value of connection equates to, and I'm not sure exactly how they come up with this number, but they're finding that it comes up to around $500+ per person per year in lost engagement, right? People feeling disconnected, absenteeism, quiet quitting, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
But they're finding, if you can measure that, that's around $500 a year per person. So, think about Multidots. What's that? $60,000 a year at 120 people. And I'm not suggesting that this is a problem that's costing you this money, because I hear your proactivity and your care about this. But a lot of organizations that are sailing by and not thinking about this as something to solve for, and letting that play out, and it's costing them, tens of thousands of dollars a year. And that's at a what you call like a mid-sized company. Think about larger enterprise organizations, and we're talking about millions of dollars lost in engagement productivity from people just because they feel pretty lonely at work. Loneliness is up. I made a note of this, like 67% from people who went from office to working remotely. Like 2 out of 3 are saying, I feel really lonely. So this is like a big problem to solve for. And so I think sometimes entrepreneurs, business owners, they see dollar signs when they think about the real estate they don't have to pay for. And I don't know how that felt for you when you said, okay, we are going to let go of the office and like there's a potential gain. But my suggestion is that you would reinvest some of that, right? You have, I heard you, I was listening to one of your previous podcasts and you were talking about having a grand meetup for, all the folks in Multidots and, seeing the value of, okay, if we had $60,000 that we could then reinvest into the experience of our people, right? This is a wash. We're not talking about losing money. We're talking about reinvestment in this, and we can boost our sense of connection with each other. And we can also boost a number of other things that we know are going to have a positive business outcome as well. So you're really getting a positive return on that investment. But yeah, I would just really say, like, don't think of remote and distribute as like a lean way of doing business. It doesn't mean that it's just because it's streamlined and you don't have the complexities of office and real estate and those taxes and the stuff that goes with that. Just because you bypass that, it doesn't mean that it doesn't that workplace and the word place is maybe a misnomer, but that experience of the essence of what it's like to work for your company, that still needs investment, and it also needs deliberate design around it. It's not just going to happen, and that sense of connection isn't going to be there unless you intentionally build it in. So there's a number of things that people can be doing to help with that. I don't know. We see companies that have an all hands meeting once a quarter or once a year or never. And that's just a huge missed opportunity. I know that meetings are expensive. You think about the number of, if it's an hour meeting and you've got 100 people there, then that's a really expensive meeting. But if you are really going to get the biggest bang for your buck, you have that really focused on the things that are going to hurt your business if you don't intentionally design for it. That's connection, that's building trust, that's building relationship. Because you don't really have a lot of other opportunities for that. Everything else you do is all business.
Yeah. So Lance, what are some of the advice or tips that you have for the managers? Because I have seen that, so there are like as a company, they make a decision that we want to go remote or hybrid and all those different models. We'll talk about that as well. Like, what are your advice and observations on that? But talking specifically about the leaders and the managers in big companies who used to actually manage their team more like in person. Now with the remote work, what are the challenges they are facing, and what are the advice that you have for them?
Yeah, I hear a lot of different things. I hear this: how do we know people are working if we can't see what they're doing? I hear managers that are saying, I'm just tired of people just sitting in their pajamas and not actually doing anything. And I kind of understand, because it's a big change from where you were. But my question sometimes is, are you sure that people were actually doing things when they were in the office too? Because it's not too hard to pretend to work, whether you're at home or you're in the office. And if you're inclined to pretend to work at home, you're probably inclined to pretend to work at the office too. So I think there's a bigger conversation than just location to be had around this for certain. But as a leader, as a manager, what is a manager there for? Like, what do they exist for? And if I think about coming out of the Industrial Revolution, we have this concept, this role of a manager. It's to make sure that work gets done, it gets done right, and it gets done on time. That's what they're there for. And so in an office environment where people can be close to one another, a number of tactics get developed to facilitate that. We want to get things done on time, want to make sure they get done right. And so managers that are coming from a historical background of being in office and this carryover from even Industrial Revolution type tactics, they still work. It doesn't mean that they're the best, but it's working in an office. But then when that tries to get translated into a completely digital atmosphere, it really falls apart. And one thing that I saw a lot of when folks were making that first transition, and this happens when a manager who has the habit of using their physical presence to create pressure. I don't know if you have the same memory, but I shared this with someone else and they laughed because they immediately got it. So maybe some of your listeners will too. But if you're in school, if you're in grade school and you're not paying attention, you're goofing around, maybe you're talking to your neighbor, and your teacher just moves closer to your desk, right? They don't have to look at you or say anything to you, but just that like increase. Okay, so you're resonating with this
I
too,
remember
right?
that. Uh-huh.
Yeah. The increased pressure of that proximity all of a sudden makes you think you better get back to what you're supposed to be doing, and stop that unwanted behavior. And so in an office, that's easy to do. You go to the coffee pot, the water cooler, and you just take the path that goes closest to the desk of your direct reports, and just your physical presence creates a pressure. And so that was working for people.
Right.
But then when they move to this completely remote environment, how do you create that presence and pressure if you can't be there? And so we have people that are leaders that are checking in, every 15 minutes. Hey, do you have an update? What's going on? What are you working on? And there's this bombardment of pressure from a leader or a manager who thinks they're doing their job and making sure that people are staying on task. And instead of looking for that update all the time, if we build in systems that allow us to understand what the expectations are and trust that someone can follow that. Yeah. Right. Because it's that application of pressure that's actually disrupting people's work. So if I had to have a response for you every 15 minutes, every hour, or even every like 2 or 3 hours throughout the day on what I'm working on, how my progress is, what I'm going to do next, I would never get anything done. I'd spend all my time keeping the manager happy and satisfied that I was working, and no work would get done. And so as a leader, as a manager, we want to empower people by protecting that space they need to actually get work done. And so that's encouraging people, like, turn off your notifications for a 4-hour block, after breakfast, like just silence everything. And that's okay, because there's probably no emergency big enough that needs to get through to you in the next few hours. But the real value is that you can get your work done without interruption. And hey, then come back and check in on what's going on, see what messages were coming in, but feel free to disconnect for that little while. And as a manager, I'm going to do my best to protect your calendar and protect time where people are trying to pull you into other meetings. I'm there to empower and facilitate your best work rather than your work facilitate my advancement and promotion.
Right. Yeah. And you made a very good point, Lance, about the trust. And yeah, I think going remote, not going remote, or staying in a remote or going back to where we were, I think the trust has been something that came up a lot as one of the big reason why this remote work will make or break. Or also just in general, like I have heard that a lot of different times, that from my actually team as well, like, hey, I'm doing this because what if one of the team member does something wrong? What if they are going to abuse or whatever, right? So my framework has been always this, like, whether it's you're managing a team, running a business, or anywhere, like if you look at actually in terms of the statistics, there will always be 5% bad actors. Doesn't matter where you are, whether it's a company, team, or wherever. Always 5%. Doesn't matter how, what policies or rules you create. There will always be 5% bad actors. The question that I ask myself, or I also encourage my leaders, managers, and leaders to ask these questions, like, is it fair to punish those 95% people who are good, just because of these 5% people? Because when you say that I don't trust these 5% people, what they do is that, like, they create the rules and the policies and the process around assuming that all the 100% of these people will actually are these bad actors, right? So that's what, like, don't punish those 95% people who are doing good, who you can trust, who wants to utilize this freedom and flexibility for the productivity and not going to misuse, and stuff like that. So that's something that's kind of like framework that I always go back to, is like, I don't want to punish this 95% of the good people just because of those 5% bad actors. And that's where my focus is, to create a policy and process around that, assuming that everyone is good, and find these 5% bad actors and make sure that, focus on there as a manager or as an entrepreneur, and do something about so that they don't so they stay longer in your company or in your group, but make sure that you continue to empower this 95% of the good actors.
Yeah, I really like that. It makes me think about Patrick Lencioni's book, The Ideal Team Player, and how, in the organization he was talking about there, people are hungry, they're humble, and they're people smart. And if somebody doesn't have all three of those, we can help them if they're interested to improve, or they will typically accept the invitation to find the door, because that's what we're going to be about, right? So we're going to push towards that 95%, and for the 5%, which I think can be really, really difficult, especially for an employer, to swallow the pill of, hey, you might not want to keep all of your people, right? Like there might be situations where someone is not as excited about learning and growing as a person, and to grow into a productive role here, and it's a gift to them and a gift to your organization to help them find a place where they're going to thrive.
That's a good point.
That reminds me of something that I read just the other day about the idea of excavating versus building. And I came in thinking that I wanted to share this. So a friend of mine, Darren Murph, posted this just recently, and it just stuck with me so much that I had to bring it up. The idea of excavation versus building, and that internal work of like, am I willing to do a little digging inside of me so that I can grow into someone who's going to thrive in this organization?
Right.
That's a hard thing for any person to do, and then for organizational leaders to also be willing to do a little bit of that digging in their business to secure that foundation. Because I've worked with clients who are so bent on building quickly, scaling, growing, innovating, but there are foundational things like we don't know what values we hold as an organization.
Right.
We don't have a process for half a dozen things that are really important, but like there's a market out there and we're just going to win that market. And we talk all the time about the concept of technical debt. Listening to Ben Horowitz's book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, and he talks about management debt. And I think there's also organizational debt that we incur when we're so focused on building that sooner or later you're going to have to come back and pay for that with interest. And I've also found too, like not doing some excavating in my own life, my own thought life, my own emotions, my own growth. I've had to pay interest on some things that I didn't pay for up front, right? I think we all probably have that same experience, but not repeating it over and over again is the goal.
And that's true, I think. So another thing that, based on what you said, that comes to my mind is regarding the managing the reputation. I'm not sure if that came to your observation, but one thing I have seen that, like, as a manager, they have some, like, for example, they have some bias about how I want to manage my team and what's the best way to lead a team in a remote setup. But also, the team is also creating a perception, an impression of their managers and leaders, how they behave and how they actually interact with them. So that was a part where, that what you mentioned about the debt. So I tell my team, my managers and leadership team to focus on that, like every little action that you do, you're leaving an impression on your team that what kind of person you are. And that's where I was like, and that actually eventually build a trust, a connection, and all of that with your team. And then you will have less friction, because those little misses day to day. So for example, like you commit your team like, hey, I'm going to respond to you, or I'll share this document by tomorrow evening, and you forgot it. He's like, oh, I'll forward that email tomorrow. You forget, and you keep doing that, repeatedly. Then you are also creating an impression in your team that you are not reliable, or like, I need to give you multiple reminders, then only things will get done. So I was like, that's kind of like little things. That's how we build our reputation by doing these small things. And so that was like an eye-opening for my team when we kind of talked about that. And I was like, yeah, like when we why one manager or one leader has a lot of success managing a team and another manager maybe struggling. And one area to look at it is how well you are managing your reputation by day-to-day basis by doing those small actions.
Yeah, it's really easy to overlook the small things. Right?
Yeah.
Think about I'm a leader, I'm a manager, and go to what are the big things I need to do? What are the big philosophical approaches I need to take? How do I think about leadership and really like, how do I act? Like one big thing that I call out and when I wrote about this, skills for remote managers is empathy. I was talking to a client a couple, I don't know, maybe it's been a month now, and she was telling me when she was early in her career, they took this personality, traits test. I don't know which one it is, right? There's lots of them out there, but she scored really high on empathy. And at the time, and this was maybe 20 years ago, at the time, that was seen as a problem, as a leader and a manager, right? You're going to be too soft. You're not going to be able to, make those hard decisions or give the tough love that, people really need in order to grow. And now we're finding, the more we study this, the leadership, that the skill, and it's a skill, you can develop a skill around empathy and being empathetic is extremely valuable. And I think what you're calling out about those little things is so important. When you ask your team members how they're doing and you actually care to listen, like you're not just doing it as a formality, and that there's things going on in their personal life and you're asking about those things. Hey, how's your kid fell off their bike and broke their arm last week. How's that recovery going? How was the doctor's visit? These things that it's not just trying to convince someone you care. It's actually learning how to care about other people is such an important skill for leadership and management. And, a huge way to develop that and build that out is through these one-on-one opportunities you get with people as a manager. I know a lot of managers, they kind of want to skip those because they get stale, they get boring. But that's an underutilized super tool for building connection, building trust, leveraging that one-on-one space, showing empathy there, asking you questions, like I said, like personally, getting to know people on a personal level, caring about who they are, not just the work they do. And always protecting that space and knowing that it's going to be on the calendar and we're going to have that meeting, and and it's really, it's if you're a manager, this is really your direct reports meeting. It's their meeting. What do they want to talk about? What are they struggling with? And how can you help them? It's not your meeting to tell them what they're doing for the next few days.
Yeah. So you mentioned about empathy, and you also on your blog that you write about the 6 critical skills for the managers, right? So empathy, I think, is one of them for the remote managers. And so what are some of those examples of that you have seen maybe in other managers who does it really well? Yeah.
So one thing that I think has been done really well for me, for a manager that I've been managed by, is that there's always well, I touched on this, like that it's my meeting, right? If I'm the direct report, if I'm the employee, if I'm the individual contributor, this is my meeting. I get to like use it how I want to, how I need to, and having a running agenda document. So this is a real practical, hands-on way that listeners can kind of take this and run with it. Just even if it's just a Google Doc or a Word doc, right? That's open, and you don't even have to have a new one every time. It's just running, right? So wherever you left off the last time, you just start at the top with the next week's meeting. And the individual contributor, the employee, they fill that out, right? Maybe you have some questions that are boilerplate that are there every week that we're going to touch on these, 3 or 4 things. But as you're going through your week as a teammate, as a team member, putting things in there that you're going to need help with, or you're going to want to ask for help with, or that you're struggling with. And so, when it comes time for that meeting, it's yours and you get to drive it. And you have an agenda there, and that's what it's for. Getting what you need from that session. And I've always really valued that opportunity to, when my manager says, "What's on your mind?" and it's all right there, and that way I'm not having to try to remember in the moment. I'm pulling up, the things that I've made note of through the week, and it's kind of like my own little journal that I kept through the week of wins, questions, answers that I need, decisions that I'm blocked on, so it can be very work related, and it can also be very personal related. Like, right, maybe I'm you did my first marathon, and so I would like talk about that with my manager. I've been training for this. Like, my knee hurts. I'm figuring out my nutrition and how my hydration works while I'm getting in those higher miles, and it's just something that I get to share. And as I'm doing that, I'm building more connection, and I'm building more trust, and I'm building more, and then to tie in that empathy skill, right? How my manager responds to the things that I'm struggling with, things that have been hard for me. There's a huge correlation between increased innovation and high levels of empathy. When a manager responds to our struggles, our problems with high levels of empathy, the numbers say something like 60+% of people report, I can do my most innovative work here. But when I have an issue or a struggle and I don't get a very empathetic response, whether it's a personal or a business struggle, that empathy drops down into like 12 or 13% of people saying, I can do innovative work here. And if you're in the technology industry, if you're trying to build cutting edge solutions for your client base, innovation has got to be one of those key things that you're looking for in your workforce. Right. And so, if you want to unlock innovation, and when I'm talking about engagement retention numbers that go with empathy, it's a huge skill. And that one-on-one meeting is like super underutilized, but incredibly powerful.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to add into that, Lance, that when it comes to specifically, like if you look at the personality types, there was one thing that I recently learned, that 75% of the population is introverts. And as an introvert, how an introverts, like a lot of management practices or studies has been done, considering like more like an extroverted people, and it's like, oh, this is how you energize people. This is what, make people open up. And this is how you kind of like break the ice and build the rapport and stuff like that. But like 75% of the people are introverts. And I have noticed this, even myself, when I started Multidots, and when we were thinking about, what kind of like space we want to create as a company and culture we want to create. We have been doing a lot of different things, generalizing everyone, it's like, oh, this is how everyone, this is what people want. And so then I started spending a little bit more time and seeing that like actually a lot of people are introverts, and introverts doesn't get like connected the same way as the extroverts do. So as you mentioned about like in the first meeting, like if you ask introverts, like, how are you doing? What are you doing? Probably their answers will be very typical. Like, I'm good. I'm fine, right? Because they need like a different framework to connect and open up. So we experimented with this, and we now changed the question, and we ask introverts, what exciting did you do recently? because they always have something exciting to share about, like, oh, I read this book, I went there. So when we ask about what something that excites them, or when we ask like more specific questions, so that's where I think they open up. Versus extroverts, they're really good at the short talks. Like if you just talk about like anything, they will basically give you a 15-minute report. But introverts, it's very tricky.
Yeah. Do you feel more of an introvert than an extrovert?
I am a more introvert, yes.
Yeah, and I'm very extroverted. I just love to be with people and talk to people and listen to people and hear this. So yeah, that's a really interesting concept, and one that I'm just going to keep close to my heart too, because it's easy for me as an extrovert to not always think about that. So I do think there's a unique advantage in a digital workplace where if things are text only for a lot of our interaction, the playing field gets leveled a little bit. I don't know if you experience that, but where, if we're dealing in a hybrid or an office situation where personality drives a lot of your career advancement, or the attention that you'll get, or the projects you might pick up. Hey, in Slack, everything reads the same, right? So, how do you? I'm curious how you see that from the introverted side. Is that the case where things are a little bit more level because it's more text?
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, and I had this observation recently where, when you work, that one advantage of remote work is that where you assess everyone based on their intelligence, not based on their personality. Because in a remote work, like as you say, that a lot of time what happens is we tend to see the personality sometimes is so loud and so like visible, that always becomes that influence in order to decide that person's performance or raise or stuff like that, right? Like what kind of role this person is capable of. But I think in the remote work, that personality becomes kind of like secondary or a shadow, but your intelligence is something that truly shine. And that is something that I have also been telling my team and during our grand meetup. I say that like, hey, that I understand that corporate definition of a successful, smart, or charming person or personality is this, but it's like here, we want to focus on your intelligence. Like, doesn't matter you're an introvert or extrovert, you like, you are shy or more like outgoing, all those things. I was like, that's your personal choice. And that's your personal space and personal choice, and we respect it. But what matters is your intelligence, so intelligence is something that kind of like where we focus on. And and then that was actually such a relief because, I noticed that a lot of introverts specifically, they always kind of like think this like, hey, I don't have the confidence, or I'm not like whatever, so some of those, because of that, they constantly holding themselves back into taking new initiative. But now once they know that, hey, that intelligence is what counts, so that's when I think the confidence and things gets more better. And we have seen that difference, since we focusing more on, and also basically addressing that question, because sometimes I feel like when we don't address that question, then they just continue to make wrong assumptions. So
I love how you articulated that for your team so they would have that understanding. So many leaders, I think, hold those same ideals, but they never put it to words. And especially in a place where we don't have I can't observe how you act, right? Because I'm not close to you. I don't see you. Like all I see is your avatar and our chat, window or whatever. Right. So when we don't have the luxury of learning norms the same way we have for generations, we've got to do something different. And I think it's really important that we codify in writing, these really important like value statements that you just made.
Yeah.
Right. And so that way, when I'm new to multi-dots and I come in and I like, one of the first things I get to read is this statement that you care about, what I can bring in terms of intelligence, performance, like making multi-dots a better place.
Mm-hmm.
How I show up with a personality at a meetup doesn't impact my career.
Exactly.
Like I can, like, that's a deep breath that I can take, if I'm an introvert or if I'm on, if I'm on the spectrum, like my son is on the autism spectrum, and an environment where personality and interaction was really important. Like it would be so hard for him to ever have a career. But if it's about what you're bringing to the table in terms of skill and execution, that's huge.
Yeah. And I think it's just that awareness, something that so that's something that I have also been focusing on, to telling my managers as well, that like, hey, when you go, like when you are running a meeting, with your team, and you ask questions about the feedback, let introverts speak first. Because you might have noticed that, like, that's my observation, was that like if you have like 3 extroverts in the room, and if they start first, introverts like, yeah, I agree with her or I agree with him, but you will not see that original. So that's another thing, like shift we change. I was like, that ask introverts first, like, okay, what do you think? And then we go with that, like, so we'll let introverts speak first, so, and because extrovert, they already know what they want to share. They have that confidence, or maybe it naturally comes to you. But introverts is something that, when they will see that an extrovert has made a good point, they will not actually share their version of that. It might be the same, probably they will agree with what others are saying. It's not about the agreement. It's about bringing in the different version and perspective of the same thing. So we change that. It's like whenever we ask a question, we always tend to let introverts speak first.
Yeah, that's great. And I've seen meetings where, somebody hasn't spoken up at all. Halfway through the meeting, whoever's facilitating is saying, hey, Anil, what, we haven't heard from you yet. We'd love to hear what you think about this. And a lot of times there's a lot of great thoughts going on. Just they're not coming out.
Yeah. And one thing that you mentioned on your 6 critical skills is coaching. Do you want to talk a little bit more about it?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm excited about this one. So because I'm a sports fan, that's why I like it so much, right? But if you think about the role of a coach versus the role of a supervisor or a manager, right? And going back to kind of that definition I gave earlier, like a manager is here to make sure things get done right, they get on time, work gets done. A coach is about unlocking potential within individuals. So, we see sports stars who really transcend their sports, or even like sport as a whole, the global like transcendence. Michael Jordan, Pele, Tiger Woods. These folks that are just bigger than the game itself. And if you look at some of their player coach relationships, I don't know that they'd be who they were without some of that. Right? Who is it along the way that unlocked something for them and helped move them to that next level? And I really apply this coaching concept to performance reviews. And performance reviews are kind of a dirty word. Nobody likes performance reviews. Most people think they're totally useless. The information coming out of it is worthless. Nobody wants to give a report on how their peer did. And so I definitely take a little bit different approach when it comes to performance reviews, but I see it as a coaching opportunity. And some of the folks that I've been a manager for, I've taken this coaching approach, and like, I'm looking for things that I see that they have an aptitude for, but they maybe haven't tried because they haven't seen it in themselves yet. Right. And so suggesting like, hey, I think there's a really interesting opportunity because you have this skill, and I want to validate, a skill that I've been observing that they may not be aware of yet, and move them towards an opportunity to test that skill or that ability. And in some cases they find they didn't know that they would love this thing that they've never tried doing before.
Right.
It just seemed like it would be outside of their expertise and they've never had the opportunity to try, but, in one case, encouraging somebody who, was a really, had a lot of really great thoughts on diversity, equity, inclusion to join a podcast. And she did, and she did a great job. And she's like, you've really, awakened something in me that I'm really excited about. I want to do this more. And, gave her an opportunity to explore how she's going to contribute to her company, but to the industry as well. Speaking out as an ally for diversity, equity, and inclusion, subjects. So, looking for ways that we both ask a lot of questions as a coach, right? What's working well? What's not working well? What are you proud of? What do you want to get better at? And then sharing things that we've observed that they're not seeing yet, that we can either help them overcome or unlock and level up. And so looking at, 1/4 of the year at a time through the lens of these, coach style questions and encouragement opportunities, as opposed to a rubric of, numbers 1 through 5 and, like corporate performance reviews tend to be. So I'll stop there, but that I get a little bit excited about that.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I think my version of that is that my observation has been that some of the managers or leaders, they really like doing things, and managing things, and on their own, they're also learning a lot, so some of them are really good learner and they continue to learn and grow and enhance their skill. But when it comes to sharing that learning, there is a little hesitance, like, oh no, I'm not a good, I don't know how to teach, I don't know how to share, and stuff like that. And so my encouragement has been always like, teachers learns the most. Like, so as a teacher, when you teach it, that's where you are solidifying your learning. So I encourage them a lot in that sense too, that basically, and when you teach, you care, so it's also another way of showing a care, because if I just keep telling my team like, yeah, I care for you, and I always think best about you, and so all those different promises, I think the best way to deliver is teaching that and taking that interest, into to sharing the learnings. So yeah, I love that when you put that down as one of the critical skill for the managers. And so that's about coaching, and you have one more as clarity.
Yeah, and we touched a little bit on how I see clarity when you were sharing how you share that value of, like, we focus on an intellect and what you're bringing to the team. And so codifying things for a team as a leader, as a manager, whether you're leading an organization or you're leading a team, being able to build out something that's like what you might call like a team charter, right?
Yeah.
Here's how we're going to operate. Here's how we're going to operate as a team. And this is like who makes up the team. Here's how we interact. Here's our communication, technology stack. Like a number of different things that go into making up something that's like a team charter.
Yeah.
And it's there, it's clear. And so we're clear about how we set expectations. We're clear about what tools we use for expectation setting. The more of the can't think of a word for it, fuzz, the lack of focus that we can eliminate for people, the more we can bring, that lens into clarity, into focus, as a leader, we eliminate and we create a lot of efficiencies, because there's so many distractions that happen when, something comes up. Oh, what do I do about this? Or who do I ask for this? And you kind of, do the circuitous, look around and ask around and go to Google, and you're having that quick reference guide that says, here's what we do when this happens. Here's who we talk to when this happens. Here's who's on our team that has this skill set or knowledge base, or knowledge set that we can go to. Who's an e-commerce expert? Oh, we know that's person A, B, or C? Who's who's really deep at back end? That's this person. And it's not just about role title, but it's about like specifics within that. Who could we ask about Tailwind? Or we can put a lot of efficiency when we create clarity.
Yeah. I read Chris Lemma. He actually published something a few months ago, and he said it, How to Work With Me guide.
Yeah.
Did you see that one?
I think I remember something about that. Yeah. I love that idea.
I love that. And I think that will be another great example that can actually fit well into the clarity skill that you mentioned about it. And he said that like how to work with me, because like your team is not a mind reader. They can't read your mind that, how you want to work with your team. And so he had this cool idea about like, hey, create how to work with me guide. So it's a Google Doc where you just put in down like, hey, this is how I like to work. This is what the things kind of like, the best way to work with me, and encouraging others to also write it down and share. So then you're not just basically making an assumption. And I think you also mentioned that about that, like not having that clarity, it actually is the biggest productivity killer, because then you just keep wasting time on things that none of you wanted actually, and so so those wrong assumptions, and that actually leads to a lot of time wasting, and also creates a lot of relationship issues as well. So in terms of like, when you work in a team, so I love that when Chris Lemma shared about it, How to Work With Me guide.
Yeah, I like that a lot, and that efficiency breakdown, the productivity breakdown. If you're like me and have this version of ADD, that if something is hard, you'll put that to the side, right, and do the things that you can do.
Yeah.
That's my personality tendency is to if I'm running into a wall with this one, I'll do the things that I know I can do, with less friction. And so if you can make this one easier for me, and oh, well, then I can get that one done too, in order, instead of having to push it off. So yeah, I think there's a number of different personality makeups that just really benefit from that short, like FAQ style list of hacks on how we get stuff done as a team.
Yeah, love it. All right, Lance, so we talked a lot about managers, like, how the managers or leaders in the organization can apply some of these tips in order to manage their team remotely. What are some of the actionable tips you have for the companies, and that how they can actually optimize their remote work culture and environment?
Yeah. Okay. Really good question. And I'll try not to be too long on this, but yeah. So starting foundationally, kind of that excavate versus build concept as an organization, as a leader, if you're an entrepreneur, and even if it's just, you and you've got your first team member, whatever, like you're at the beginning, is don't skip those foundational things. And so a lot of that has to do with, even if it's lightweight, because I understand that building a lot of process and operational weight early isn't like as efficient. But early on, at least creating definition around things that are really important to the operation of this company as it grows and scales. So there's a number of companies that I've worked with. You would be shocked, 2,000, 3,000 people. And I say, so what's the mission statement for this organization? And I'm talking with the C-suite. And they all kind of look at each other and they're just not sure. And I'm thinking, well, at what point was that really critical? And how did you get from there to, we're at 3,000 people now, and we don't have this yet. So how do we know what to say yes to and what to say no to as a business, when we're not clear on why we exist, and then values as well? So, and maybe it takes a 2 or 3 day workshop where you sit down, it could be someone like me, or it could be someone else, but that sits down and asks you those questions so we can uncover where are you going and what's really important, and writing that down. And then how does behavior at your organization, how do we translate those things into behavior at the organization? So if a focus on output is a value that we want to hold on to, like following that we've been talking about, then we're not going to reward people based on time in the office, or like number of on-sites they can make it to, or what are the things that we're going to say, like, these are the behaviors we do and here's the behaviors we don't do, and just codifying at a very basic level a number of those things early on. It sets a foundation where you don't incur a lot of that organizational debt. So I'd start there. Like, it feels like it's a real basic thing to have to say and reiterate, but even if it's grabbing a book like Traction, Gino Wickman's book, the Entrepreneurial Operating System, and just that's like a play-by-play guide on how to do it. And it's just it's laid out for you. And if you're a small organization, like, it's so easy to start there. Just if you're a DIY kind of person, grab that book and just go for it. But don't skip it. Facilitate communication if you're going to work with people that aren't in the same place as you. Maybe you create a communication charter where it says, here's the tools we use, here's what we expect. Like, going back to that, protecting people's focus time, writing down that it's okay to be offline for 4 or 6 hours or whatever it's going to be, right? You don't feel the need to respond. In fact, 24 hours is a great response time to a Slack message or a Teams message. If you put that in writing, because there's a lot of people coming from so many different backgrounds.
Right.
I worked with one organization, and people would pull over to the side of the road during their commute to respond to Slack messages, because if they didn't, within 15 minutes, they were going to get an earful when they got to the office. And it's just, I would hope that's not the structure for communication. If you're an organization that's listening to this,
right.
But I mean, there may be exceptions, but for the most part, like, a 24-hour response window is okay. Yeah, and we can be operating just fine with that. But put that in writing, because there are people who are coming in with workplace trauma baggage, and they're afraid. I got a Slack message from my boss or from a VP or from a senior executive, and if I don't have a really intelligent answer in 15 minutes, like, that's a lot of anxiety. So just right out of the gate, let people know that what communication expectations are. Trust is such a big one. We talked about trust at organization level. Tell people what's going on. It's really hard to be in the dark, especially, I mean, in good times and bad. And I think it's easy to say, especially with whatever's going on at whatever given time. But, like, think about right now, right? People are in the tech industry. Layoffs are happening an awful lot. Economics are hitting a lot of tech companies really hard. And to be in a place where you don't have very much clarity or understanding about what's happening within your organization, you see some people going and you don't know why. You see turnover at the executive level and you don't know why. You don't know how the company is performing. Did we lose a bunch of money last quarter? Be willing to have some transparency around what's going on in the organization. That builds a lot. Having things to hide doesn't build a lot of trust, right? In any relationship, when you find out folks are hiding things from you, a lot of trust is lost, and it's really hard to rebuild. So and collaboration, I think, is another a really big one that I'll just touch on briefly. In that, proximity doesn't equal collaboration. Just because we're busy in the same place at the same time doesn't mean that we're actually collaborating. So, setting some examples of what it looks like to actually collaborate and allowing for asynchronous collaboration is a lot of times it's a light bulb that comes on for people. Hey, while you all were asleep, I was working on this. I had a great idea. I put it into this, whether it's a doc or a mural or a deck, and I've taken everything that we've done so far. Here it is, and I'm going to bed, but you all can pick it up tomorrow. And then when I wake up, like, wow, look at all the work that's gotten done. And we
Right.
didn't have to even be online at the same time. And, being able to facilitate that kind of thing goes a long way too. So,
Right. I want to go back to the example that you shared about, like, when you see a Slack message, you feel like, oh, I need to respond to this message. And yeah, I have experienced that a lot. And especially like with new joinees in my companies, like whenever I go and to meet them, I always tell them, and this is something that I think both, for employees as well as employer, they both have to pay attention to because this can go a lot of different way wrong, and one great example that I always share with my team is that it's like especially in India, you might have, a lot of people have seen it, but the example is that if you have seen a mosque, a temple, and church, right? So if you visit these three different places, so each place has slightly different rules. So let's say if you go to temple, right, you have to take your shoes out. You can't walk in a temple with shoes on. Okay. So, but then when you go to mosque, you not only have to take your shoes out, you also have to wash your feet and hands, and then you enter in the mosque. But in church, it's okay to walk with shoes. So now you are the same person, right? And just going from one institute to another institute, and in one institute, maybe wearing a shoes is fine, there is no any problem. But when you go to a temple, people will give you a look, So that's something that I always tell, like when you go from one company to another company, what was normal in your previous company might not be the normal here, and what was like not normal in your previous company might be very normal here. So it's like, as a company, we need to do a better job communicating, like what are the house rules in this company, and also as an employee, not making any assumptions that, oh, in my previous company, if I don't respond to a Slack message in 30 minutes or the same day, that will be a bad sign or a bad performance. But that might not be the same in this company.
And you don't have, you can't look around the room and see what other people are doing, right? Because like if I came to Temple, I could look over and I saw that you slipped your shoes off.
Yeah.
And I could see that everyone inside has their shoes off. Well, I think I better take my shoes off too, right? And I would follow that lead. But here, when you come into, you sign into Slack for the first time, like this is your workspace, or you sign into Teams for the first time, and you can't have a look around and figure out, hey, what's everybody do here?
Right.
So I can follow along. So yeah, you have to make that really transparent, intentionally documented, and rolled out for your organization. Otherwise, like you said, otherwise you're making assumptions about where people are coming from, and that they'll do what you want here, and we don't want to do that.
Yeah. Great. Lance, we talked a lot about the managers and the company, and I think there is a lot of great advice and tips for anyone who wants to be successful. If you're managing a team, managing a department, or as an entrepreneur, there are so many different tips and things that we can apply to create an great workplace culture. And some of them, in fact, also applicable to, doesn't matter if you're remote or you have an actual office. Some of these things are so foundational for all kind of workplace.
Right. And I love the statement that remote work doesn't create the problems. It just reveals the problems that were there. So
I love it. Yeah. Nice. All right. Lance, any other advice or things that you have that you would like to share, as a conclusion?
No, I think just I really appreciate you having me here. It's been a really fun conversation. Sad we waited so long to have such a great chat, and just really enjoy the opportunity to talk with you, and look forward to getting better acquainted with your audience and your listeners.
I love it. And thanks for your time as well, Lance. Hey, everyone. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Peaceful Growth. Let me tell you, I'm an introvert. And also, English is not my first language. So you would understand how uncomfortable it would be for me to do a podcast like this. But we don't grow staying in our comfort zone. And that's what I'm doing here. And also encourage you to do things that challenges you and take you out of your comfort zone. I would also appreciate it if you shared this episode with others. It will help me on my mission to inspire 100 million people to build an extraordinary life. To learn more about how I balance my multi-million-dollar business and continue to learn and grow in other areas of life, check out my weekly newsletter, Learn Plus Grow, on anilg.substack.com. May the peace and growth be with you.